the dog rises up. Well, the dog rises up. Well, the dog rises up. And I'm the rice. I'm just doing, all kind of faces and gestures and all kind of nonsense early in a 7 a.m. damn morning. Wake up. I ain't up for my health. Well, actually, I am. You're healthier if you get up early in the morning. Doug Rice, how are we? 7 a.m., the Doug Rice Show, early morning. I'm the guy that sets you off to work or just sets you off. I don't know. Today, Friday. I know everybody's happy. It's Friday. If you work for a living, I do this too. I lead with the kingdom every day. And I'm barely making it, just like every other conscious woke Negro. We are kept at bare minimum as it should go, as we are prepared to do exactly that. Go. Today we're covering part 2 of the Nat Turner Revolt by Patrick H. Breen, so he could get his doctorate in ethics of all things. And I'm cool with that. I do believe I spoke with another gentleman who was of like mind a few days ago. And it's wonderful to have individuals who gift us with this kind of insight. Now, yesterday, we took a look at 4 chapters. There are 12 chapters altogether. It's obvious my voice can only take 4 at a session. So I decided that we'd jump to the last 4 chapters, 9 through 12, as we've taken a look at how things evolved in forming Nat Turner's Revolt. I think the substance of the issue was covered quite well. I think Mr. Breen did an excellent job. And what we'll do today is simply bookend with the last 4 chapters of his dissertation. And, I think it'll be great. I think you guys will have a wonderful insight. And for goodness sakes, if you so choose, please look about and peruse, check out hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Look, listen, now's not the time to be popular. I came to that conclusion this morning. This is not the time to be popular, folks. You understand? I'd love for a crowd of people to come in, look at me every morning at 7 a.m. But first, y'all got to work. Me too. And second, the numbers for me are secondary by a long shot. The information, as we are trapped and confined within this nation, is more important. That even if it get to a substantive few, it's the very least I can do. And I mean that for as certain as all of us are hurting. But for goodness sake, like, share, and subscribe anyway. I don't know, but the notification bell, I can't tell. You know that they are suppressing every effort of this kind of consciousness. They will not allow this to go out freely. This will cost a search. This will cost seeking out. They're not going to offer this offering to Negroes and the general public. Not this show. They're going to shadow ban as much as they can the Doug Rice Show. So just so you know, but it's seen by 100 people or so every day on YouTube, and I can live with that. I'm good with that. All right. Anyway, so here we go, folks. Chapter 9. Chapter 9, and it is a struggle for order. Now, just to catch everybody up, this Nat Turner's Revolt, the first 4 chapters involved his upbringing, very interesting, his formative years, how the revolt took place, and subsequent victims, the first few. I can say that skimming through chapters 5 through 8, all of the information didn't look great. All right. It was a lot of killing, A lot of ill dealing. It was, yeah, a lot of ill willing. So, and you know, there is that, and we've covered that, and that's that. Now we're going to get into what happened in the aftermath of the bloodbath. Shall we? Don't laugh. All right, here we go. Chapter 9, A Struggle for Order. Henry Vaughan was among those most deeply affected by the revolt. A major slaveholder in St. Luke's parish, he survived when the rebels bypassed his farm. His sister-in-law and nephew, Rebecca and Arthur Vaughan, were not as lucky. The rebels killed them. And one of Arthur's cousins at one of the last households where the rebels' avengers found victims. As tragic as those deaths were, however, it did not take long for Henry Vaughan to find a way to capitalize on what white Virginians saw as one of the greatest tragedies that the Old Dominion had ever faced. On Thursday, 25 August, a company of Richmond cavalry arrived in the neighborhood to help capture and kill the last of the rebels. They used Henry Vaughan's farm as a base while they patrolled the neighborhood and investigated the revolt. Until the following Wednesday, Vaughan supplied the Richmond troops with feed for the horses and food for the troops. When the Richmond soldiers were ready to leave, Vaughan presented a bill for more than $800. How dare he? John Hampton Pleasance, the newspaper man and a member of the Richmond Company, responded with outrage. Pleasance believed that Vaughan unjustly took advantage of the slave revolt. Within 3 days of returning to Richmond, Pleasance recounted this episode at the end of one of the most important articles about the revolt. According to Pleasance, Vaughan should have furnished the provisions of the company, charging no more than would indemnify him. Pleasance thought $800, which would have been enough to buy 2 slaves, excessive for few days' rations, which had also cursed as the commonest and stinking fare. They didn't like getting overcharged. Well, there it is there. Too damn bad. That's just like them. Just make some money off all that's sad. I don't know. Because of the terrible fare, many of the Richmond Company lived off the hospitality of others in the country. In person, Pleasant was even more vituperative than in print. Dear God, I can't believe I hit that one. At a Pittsburgh party celebrating the Richmond Light Dragoons, Pleasance offered the following toast. Henry B. Vaughan, the Jerusalem publican, who speculated upon the bones of his kindred, which the dragoons went to bury and avenge. Did they call us dragoons back then? Wow. Pleasant's insults suggest the type of conflicts that follow the insurrection. The disputants did not disagree about the revolt itself. Surely both Pleasance and Vaughan found the revolt abhorrent. Instead, they disagreed about what the revolt meant. How should the people respond? Although Vaughan never explained himself in the public record, he apparently thought that there was nothing wrong with making money in the aftermath of the revolt. Pleasance, on the other hand, argued that the revolt had created a crisis that changed the rules of white interaction. No one, he believed, should use this tragedy to enrich himself. Pleasance never considered this principle with respect to his own actions, including filing stories from the scene of the revolt that made his newspaper the best source of someone who wanted to find out more about what happened in Southampton in the weeks after the revolt. So his perspective, interesting. The disagreements about the rules of conduct after the revolt point to a larger issue: the fragility of authority following the revolt. At a time of peace and stability, Pleasance claimed that Vaughan should have underwritten the housing of troops on his farm would have been seen as absurd. Interesting. But the revolt brought the ordinary rules that govern society into question. Pleasance believed that the revolt had changed what was required of members of the white society, in this case about hospitality and money-making. In making this claim, Pleasance turned not to the law, but a public opinion. Pleasance may have recognized that Vaughn had a legal right to charge a steep price for housing the Richmond troops. But Pleasance also understood that his public pronouncements and articles worked to inflict upon Vaughn the severest punishment, the indignation of the public. Henry Vaughn's response to Pleasance's charge is unknown, although Pleasance died 15 years later on the field of honor. No evidence suggests that these insults escalated to a duel. One might guess that Vaughn, who lacked a printing press, may have struggled to answer the widely published charge. On the other hand, since the white oral tradition in Southampton remembers Vaughn's nobly, perhaps Vaughn vindicated himself, at least amongst his neighbors. Whatever Vaughn did, others in Southampton and elsewhere defended their authority at a moment of weakness. In the months after Revolt, those whose authority seemed most vulnerable in the days after Revolt had emerged from the tumult with their authority intact and, in many cases, increased. No matter the outcome of the Pleasance, Vaughan spat. The shift of power in the white community after revolt is clear. From the moment when the rebels were first dispersed and the white community had available any option it wanted to consider, the autonomy of most whites in Southampton had been quickly circumscribed. Those like Pleasance, who rejected the traditional rules of white interaction, exchange, and defense, lost power. By the time the trials began, a small coterie of Southampton's most prominent men had put themselves in a position to decide the fate of Southampton's accused rebels. And so now, I was wondering too, where was it going? Where are they going with this? We're just telling a story, but what they were doing is setting the base. What they were doing is setting the tone that rang through the entire community, and that the shift of reasonable men more likely went to the way, and those that, those prominent individuals simply put themselves in a position of power to determine the fate of Nat Turner and his compadres. And that's interesting. And you wonder, will that happen here? We have a group of rebels that seem to be following Donald Trump to the precipice of destruction. There are powerful men in this country who have moved against such rebels in the past, only the difference being their color and their circumstances. But will they ever correct themselves? I dare say they won't. They took a stab at it, but they didn't really punish anybody. The traitors didn't hang. They went back and procreated. Oh, I'm sorry. I drift. All right, so I'm going to move on because it's obvious what this is regarding. It's simply talking about how whites in that era, and it dovetails with the attempt to do away with slavery, to emancipate slaves. Reasonable reaction was more likely pushed aside. And, they had some hard-nosed individuals come to the fore, decide that they were going to take over, rich, powerful, more likely landowners, and they probably took the reins. I tell you what, let's go forward to chapter 10 and see what they're saying. Here we go. Chapter 10, the trials. Again, we're talking about Nat Turner's revolt. Don't look away. Don't look away. The trial. On Wednesday, 31 August 1831, a court of Oyer and Terminer met in Jerusalem to determine the fates of those accused by participating in the recent revolt. James Tresvant, a congressman who had recently finished his third and final term in Congress, and Alexander P. Peet, the leader of the first troops to encounter the rebels were among the 5 magistrates. Let me stop for just a moment, if you would. Look, folks, we know who Ralph Tresvant is, right? Yeah, we know who Ralph Tresvant is, right? Of course we do. We now see who he disseminates from. We also know who, I think Mr. Pete, I hope I'm spelling his name right, but is that right? Is that the football player? Isn't it interesting how their names intertwine with Negroes in this time? I just wanted to point that out, and so maybe I'm just losing my mind. The remaining judges, Jeremiah Cobb, James Massenburg, and Oris Brown, were no less prominent. Each of these 5 men were among the 7 judges who heard the largest number of cases. They were also all large slaveholders. James Massenburg's 26 slaves made him one of the fewest slaves. Oh, really? Dear God. Once the court was assembled, the Commonwealth's attorney, Meriwether Broadenax, presented the charges against 9 prisoners. They were each, according to James Rochelle's notes, charged with feloniously counseling, advising and conspiring with each other, and devising other slaves to rebel and make insurrection, and making insurrection, and taking the lives of diverse free white persons of the Commonwealth. Formalism of the charging of the prisoners helped distinguish the court proceedings from the informal hearings that had resulted in summary executions in the days after the revolt. Formalism also implied that the trials were the domain of the lawyers. Others who did not know the proper form were reduced to spectators in the keenly followed trials. Let me catch you up to speed, folks. They killed quite a few of the rebels. 9 survived. 9, obviously, I believe, were put on trial, presented against 9 prisoners, and some were summarily executed. You can imagine the white rage that ran through this moment in time. The unspeakable, the unthinkable occurred in the minds of these individuals. Of course, there's no thought to the treatment of Negroes back then. You know, as they sit steeply within their sin, there's no reflection they have at all. I mean, as they kill Negroes and watch them fall, taking revenge upon them all. I mean, you know, what did they expect? What did they think was going to happen? What do they think is going to happen these days, I wonder? Seriously, I mean, chickens do come home to roost. Chickens come home to roost. And they've been in expectation of those chickens since those chickens were let loose. Next! All right, let's just continue. Sorry about that. The formalism of charging prisoners helped to see. Got it. Formalism also implied the trials were the domain of the lawyers. Got it. All right. Boom. Throughout the trials, the judges insisted on proper charges. And in a court that included James Massenburg, dismissed the cases against 2 slaves who were improperly charged. Really? After charging the 9, the court then turned to the question of representation for the accused. The law required that accused slaves have defense counsels who were to be paid $10 by the defendant's owners. In the first case, the court appointed William Parker, who, before the trials had ended, would be commissioned as the captain of the newly organized Southampton Greys to represent Daniel, the first accused prisoner. Perhaps somewhat surprisingly, Parker and the other defense lawyers tried to find ways to save the accused slaves. The defense attorneys called witnesses to the stand, trying to find any factor that might help their clients elude the gallows. They also made long and elaborate arguments to the point that one observer commented upon the court's unwearied patience. The mistakes that the 3 main defense attorneys made can be attributed to the rushed trials and the young lawyer's inexperience. Parker's 5 years of experience made him the most experienced. With that amount of experience, none could be expected to lead a panel 5 or more judges to find not guilty someone whom they believed guilty. In the end, the defense attorneys played a supporting role, giving the trials their proper form, even as the more prominent judges decided who would be condemned and who would be reprieved. So how did they approach this this tragedy? It was a tragedy from the point of the white slaveholders and all of these individuals looking upon this. Of course, it's a tragedy in their mind. And in our minds, in the slaves' minds, and the Negroes' minds, and the woke Negroes' minds, we looked at that as absolute justification and justifiable action, and something that to be looked upon as to be expected. However, in this regard, we see that they went about what they were doing with a fatalistic attitude. They knew that the end of the rope was the end of the line for all 9. Maybe, I don't know. But here's my issue, and the reason I paused. Okay, you'll find that some of them will chirp up regarding this action, this feigned civil action of justice put on to more or less tame their guilty conscience. Because here's the deal. None of this bullshit is real. These 9 men that they have within their pen, they know they're not going anywhere. They know this. And this make-believe that they try to conceive to put them in trial, the shit only lasts for a short while, and then the end of the rope is the only thing they have to look forward to. I think that they hold themselves up as something having done this is what bothers me. There are white men who read this and go, see, we try to treat him fairly. And that just makes me want to smack fire out of somebody. You treated this man, but you treat him like a human being after inhumanely treating him for his entire life and him snapping and deciding to take your fucking lives. Now you want to put him on trial. All right, I'm done. I drift. With the players casting their roles, the first trial began. Daniel, who was owned by Richard Porter, was brought before the bar. Like all the defendants, Daniel pled not guilty. No shit. Meriwether Broadnax would have to make a case. He called his best witness, Levi Waller, who had barely escaped from the farm where the rebels killed Waller's family and the children who attended a nearby school, testified about the essentials of the case. On Monday, 22 August 31, a number of Negroes, say between 40 and 50, came to the house of the witness. James Rochelle always recorded the testimony in the third person. Mounted on horseback and armed, Waller described his narrow escape and then explained how he returned and hid himself in sight of the house where he could nearly see all the things that transpired at the house. Now, hold on. What are you saying? You're saying that you went somewhere and you hid looking. Okay, just wanted to frame that. Very well. All right. After he explained how he witnessed the revolt, Waller addressed Daniel's involvement in the revolt. Waller swore that he had seen the prisoner Daniel and 2 other Negroes go into the log cabin where Waller's wife and children were hiding. Later, the 3 emerged, Daniel carrying the scissors that belonged to Waller's wife. Waller concluded his testimony describing how after the rebels had left, Waller returned to the house and found his wife and the small girl murdered. Waller's testimony was absolutely damning. Daniel had been spotted with the rebels. He had been identified as one of the rebels who had been involved in one of the most ghastly murders. Even Daniel's carrying the scissors was a significant detail because it suggested to the court that he was an active participant. After all, who but the most eager rebel would pick up something so trivial after seeing a woman and child killed? Also troubling for Daniel's defense, this testimony came from a white man. Exactly the type of witness the courts were prepared to find most reliable. According to Southern law, blacks were so unreliable that they could not testify against whites. None of Waller's testimony in the trial would be challenged by the defense. Now, absorb that, family, absorb that. Now, I do this to get the goddamn grin off Negroes' faces that decide they're going to walk around with one in open places. Because we need to be conscious that this occurred. We need to, don't deafen your ears, act like you heard this. I need you to know this is the kind of info they're trying to keep out of schools. They don't want your children to know this. They want them growing up fools. I mean, that's a fact. And doesn't this absolutely change your perspective? Doesn't it somehow adjust your Negro connective? Of course it does. All right, let's continue. Upon the completion of Waller's testimony, Meriwether Broadbacks called Nathaniel Francis, whose home the rebels visited. Francis testified that on Sunday night and Monday morning, a number, say between 50 and 60, free white persons were murdered by a number of Negroes, and it was generally believed that there was insurrection among the Negroes of the country. Generally believed that generally there's insurrection now that a few have been activated to act out what any normal captive would act out under these terms and conditions. Here's the problem, folks. I'm just going to stop if I got your permission. They didn't treat Negroes nicely. I mean, here's the thing. Are you seriously surprised? I'm hoping there was a matter of fact kind of look in their eyes as they gave this testimony. I really do. Because they know exactly how they treated folks that looked like me and you. One day, Nat Turner saw the moon and saw, some kind of sign in the sky. And for God's sake, if that Negro didn't lose or find his mind. All right, let's just continue, okay? Lord have mercy. After Weller's gripping testimony, Francis' testimony was anticlimactic. No doubt anyone in the courtroom could have said as much, and most, including Francis, could have said much more. In fact, many unnamed people apparently testified that there was a revolt. According to Rochelle's rough draft trial notes for Daniel's trial, several witnesses proved that several witnesses were killed. Interesting. Several witnesses proved that several witnesses were killed by the insurgents acting in a body. Got it. Apparently, Rochelle simply decided to use Francis' testimony that it was generally believed that there was an insurrection among the Negroes of the country as a way to get the fact that the that's not good. We had a revolt in the record. Got it. Francis and the unnamed witnesses clearly satisfied the court that the prosecution had proved that there had been a revolt in Southampton County. In ensuing trials, Broadnax did not bother to establish that there had been a revolt. Having established that there had been a revolt and having linked Daniel to the murder of Mrs. Walker and the child, Broadnax could have rested his case confident that he would win. Instead, he called one more witness, Samson Reese. Reese had been one of the whites who had joined Alexander P. Pete in pursuit of the rebels on Monday morning. He was with Pete, formerly his commander, at the moment among the 5 judges that listened to his testimony. When the whites arrived at James Parker's farm. According to Reese's testimony, Daniel was the first Negro he saw after getting to Mr. Parker's gate. The prisoner was on horseback, Although, perhaps under cross-examination, Reese admitted that Daniel appeared to be unarmed. Taken as a whole, Reese's evidence established one salient fact. Daniel remained with the rebels long after they left Waller's house. Unlike others, Daniel had not tried to escape from the rebel army. Broadnax rested his case, confident that the court would find that there had been an insurrection and that Daniel had been an active rebel for most of the day on Monday. At this point, Daniel, his counsel William Parker, and everyone in the courtroom understood that Daniel will be convicted of making insurrection. Nevertheless, Parker still tried to make a defense. Parker called Dr. Porter, Richard Porter, Daniel's owner, to the stand. Parker hoped Porter would show that Daniel was not among the core of most committed rebels. Porter said that Daniel was among those who quickly accepted that the revolt had been quashed. Porter testified that he had told not only that Daniel had surrendered himself, but that he gave himself up as he was going to the witness's house. Prosecutor Meriwell Broadnax made no objection to the defense, introducing hearsay. Porter's testimony also implied that Daniel was a last-second recruit among those who did not know about the revolt until it had started. When asked about how Daniel behaved shortly before the revolt, Porter answered that he saw nothing uncommon about the prisoner. Following Porter's testimony and closing statements from the lawyers, the judges adjourned to consider the evidence. And when the court reconvened, the judges announced their verdict. They were unanimously of opinion that the prisoner is guilty in manner and form and is in the information given against him. Given the chance to speak before sentencing, the defense said nothing. And the court sentenced the first of the rebels to be hanged by the neck until dead. 6 days later, on 5 September, some obvious problem reduced Daniel's value as a slave, since the court valued him at $100, by far the lowest valuation set by the court. And so, folks, as we pause for the cause, because that, my goodness. So what they're showing here is the perfunctory trials that set upon Negroes, and certainly without smiles. Very interesting. And they go on and on and on, and they talk about the court, and they talk about, and you know, it's a telling tale. You can get this for yourselves. Just ask, and I'll send it. I would highly 100% recommend it. All right, we're going to the next chapter because I just want there to be a hereafter. I do. Here we go, folks. All right, chapter 11. Let's do it. Let's do it. Confessions. This is going to be good. According to the confessions, Nat Turner last saw any of the other rebels Tuesday night, 23 August 1831, when he dispatched Jacob and Nat. He told them to find and tell the 4 original conspirators, Henry, Sam, Nelson, and Hart, that Turner would meet them at Cabin Pond. After Jacob and Nat left with these orders, Turner returned under the cover of the night to the neighborhood where the revolt began. He spent Wednesday hiding in the woods around Cabin Pond, hoping that some of the rebels would join him. They never did. The only people Turner recalled seeing were white men riding around as though they were looking for someone. Turner surmised that Nat and Jacob had been caught and compelled to betray me. Since the whites apparently had the information about the rendezvous, Turner fled. On Thursday night, he returned to his home on the Travis plantation, collected some food, and headed out to a hiding place that he described as a hole scratched under a pile of fence rails in a field. It was too late for Nat Turner to reassemble the original rebel force, but at least 2 blacks who had been inspired by Turner's bold fight were not ready to give up. According to one newspaper article, Will Artis wept like a child when he first joined the revolt. His attitude toward the revolt, like that of Elizabeth Turner's Davy, soon changed. The same report that described Artis weeping like a child noted that once Artis tasted blood, he was like a wolf let into the fold. When the rebels were finally dispersed on Tuesday morning, Artis was among those who escaped. Unlike those who tried to return to their homes hoping to escape the notice of whites, Artis looked to resume the revolt. Accompanied by his wife, the only woman to have been recorded traveling with any insurgent group, Artis tried to find recruits. At Benjamin Blunt's farm on Tuesday morning, they had no luck recruiting Luke, but Ben, who had been following the revolt, eagerly joined up. Meanwhile, Thomas Haithcock, Nathan, and 3 boys, possibly including Catherine Whitehead's Jack and Andrew, or Turner's emissaries, Jacob and Nat, were also trying to recruit. They traveled through the neighborhood where the revolt began, announcing that General Nat would be there Wednesday or Thursday. According to trial records, this band was unable to get any recruits, but it did get promises from at least 3 slaves who said they would join them. At some point on Tuesday, Ben and Artis, but apparently not Artis's wife, united with Haithcock's force. Apparently, Artis assumed command. On Wednesday, General Epps wrote to the governor describing how the rebels, who had not been killed or captured, were trying to make off with General Nat Turner, and Will Artis, a free man of color, at their head. Epps' intelligence about Nat Turner being with Will Artis was wrong. But he was not the only white to think Artis was a leader of the revolt. A different report described Artis as one of the principals. On Wednesday afternoon, at about 3 or 4 o'clock, Artis and his crew returned to Benjamin Blunt's farm. At the farm, Artis was intrepid, boldly vowing that he would cut his way, he would kill and cripple as he went. Perhaps Artis believed that bold words would inspire the slaves on Blunt's farm to rise and join the insurgents, who were, according to the best intelligence, reduced to 6. If so, he was mistaken. Instead of growing, his small crew began to melt away. If Jack and Andrew had been with the force, they soon surrendered to James Powell, who took them to Cross Keys. Thomas Haithcock left the rebels quickly enough that whites did not immediately arrest him for actions following the revolt. Even though he testified on 1 September in Jack and Andrew's trials, Haithcock was charged only on 12 September, after the first session of trials had ended. Benjamin Blunt's Ben also escaped detection for several months. Not until 21 November was he tried and convicted for his actions after the revolt. All alone, unable to resurrect the revolt, Artis despaired. A couple of weeks after the revolt, Artis' body was discovered with a pistol lying at his side and a ball discovered in his body. As relieved as the whites were to discover Artis' suicide, they were still worried about Nat Turner. They wanted to know what had happened to the ringleader, Nat. All are at a loss to know where he has dropped to. Initially, there was too much intelligence of Nat Turner's whereabouts. One rumor made its way to Norfolk, where the newspapers reported Ned, the preacher or prophet, had been taken. This report was wrong, both about the prophet's capture and his name. Another early rumor reported by an officer with the troops in Bellsfield described how the revolt's unnamed leader was shot in the attempt to force the bridge at Jerusalem. Same day, a letter from Jerusalem discredited that rumor. The story of his having been killed at the bridge in 2 engagements there is ungrounded. If Turner's inference about the white search party at Cabin Pond were correct, then the whites had also heard that Turner had returned to the place the revolt began. When the whites searched at Cabin's Pond failed to turn up Turner, the whites had no way to know what their best intelligence was, not simply another baseless rumor. While investigating these rumors, the whites were initially optimistic that the intelligence would lead to the capture or death of Turner. The officer from Belfield guessed that the rebels are now effectually hemmed in and all must perish within a few days. In Jerusalem, they agreed. It is believed he cannot escape. As late as Saturday, 27 August, Pleasants was certain that all the at-large rebels would be slain or made captive. The next day, General Epps himself repeated a rumor that Nat, the fanatical desperado who led the band, is arrested. That rumor was false, but Epps' willingness to discharge the troops before anyone could confirm that Turner had been found clearly indicates that Epps was confident that Turner would not be able to revive the shattered revolt. The failure of any significant unrest to follow the dismissal of the troops confirmed Epps' judgment about the safety of whites in Southampton, but the evacuation of most troops made the capture of Nat Turner seem even more important. Within a week of the revolt, an anonymous correspondent sent a letter to Virginia's Governor John Floyd suggesting a large reward for him, Nat Turner, if caught by a white or free man or manumission to any slave will bring him in dead or alive. Because Floyd still held out the hope that there was some probability of his falling into the hands of some of our troops, he did not act on this recommendation. By 13 September 1831, Floyd's hope for military capture had faded, and he wrote to Southampton requesting a full description of Nat Turner's person. The next day, William Parker provided the description that would become the basis for the reward notice that Governor Floyd issued on 17 September 1831. So, what are we looking at? What we're looking at here is not easy to catch a Negro running, even if you think you have him cornered. Resilience. Let me pause. Look, folks, a Negro male activated is a Negro male feared. I need you to understand that. I need you to hear it. You know, as strong as Negro women are, the female counterpart can only go so far, and it's Negro men that they fear the most. I mean this, folks. I mean, we ain't no joke. That's for real. I mean, it's I'm just saying what I feel. I'm sorry, just going at it. Okay, let's get back at it. Moving on. All right. None of the actions of the military commanders or the governor did anything to restrain the pursuit of Nat Turner by the people from Southampton. Sometime before the end of August, it was reported that a map drawn by Nat Turner was discovered. The idea that there may have been more material evidence secreted somewhere also led investigators to Nat Turner's wife. At first, she may have claimed to know nothing about the revolt, but when the questioning was conducted under the lash, whites were able to get from her an assortment of odd papers written in blood. On each paper, a crucifix and the sun is distinctly visible, with the figures 6,000, 30,000, 80,000, and E. No doubt the whites had an easier time interpreting a list of fewer than 20 names, which all agree is a list of his men. Although she was a recalcitrant sort of important intelligence, Turner's wife was never formally charged for abetting the revolt. Because Turner's wife produced the materials that she had only after she was whipped, it is reasonable to suppose that she had sympathized with her husband's cause. Once she came to the attention of the whites, however, it seemed doubtful that she could have been any help to her husband. If the whites were thorough in their search for Nat Turner, they would have watched to see if Turner made contact with his family. Turner foiled such a trap. According to his testimony, he avoided contact with all the black community, a sensible precaution for the most wanted man in Virginia. In the days after the revolt, escaping the detection of both whites and blacks, must have been difficult. Fortunately for Turner, he had his earlier experience when he had run away for 30 days. Unlike many other outlaws, Turner's first escape was done without ongoing assistance from the black community. That experience of hiding prepared Turner well for the days after the revolt. For 6 weeks after the 25th of August, 1831, Turner remained in the hole, never leaving my hiding place, but for a few minutes in the dead of night to get water, which was very near. Despite the intense manhunt, Nat Turner remained concealed. The early evidence, the early confidence that Turner would soon be caught evolved into a suspicion that Turner had somehow escaped from Southampton. The correspondence from Petersburg was among the first to voice this opinion. 2 weeks after the revolt, this anonymous writer opined, the ringleader, Nat Turner, is not yet taken, and my impression is will never be. The writer explained that when Turner realized the revolt was about to fail, he no doubt left the country, and ere this is secure in one of the non-slaving states. No reports of Turner in a free slave state survive, but there were reports that he was spotted in Baltimore. Now, I'm going to pause there because I got to say, the guy's taking a long time to get there, eh? So I'm going to find out, this guy going on and on and on. And all I can do is move on myself because it's not 7:46, and we'll find out if you order the PDF. We're gonna go to the last oh, that one went on for a minute, folks. I had to talk myself out of breath. They still haven't caught him, and I'm still looking. Yeah, this guy gave them a run for their money. But let's see what the last chapter has to say. For God's sake, it says Christian Voices. That's interesting. All right, let's get on the way. So this is the final chapter of the dissertation offered by Patrick Breen. Now, we were moving briskly through this publication, if you know what I mean, and you are able to check it out yourself. I believe there are 339 pages. I can't read that, not even in 20 stages. Let's just check out the last chapter and we'll move on. Here we go, folks. Pop. Chapter 12, Christian Voices. 30 years after Nat Turner's revolt, another crisis forced Southampton's deeply divided political community to fall into line under the leadership of the county's elite. During the secession crisis, Southampton cast not a single vote against secession 6 weeks after the war started. Daniel W. Cross notes, however, that this consensus was an anomaly. It stood in contrast to the country's long tradition of disagreement among whites. According to the Cross, this history of intense party politics emerged in the 1830s. And there's no evidence that the political fights he studies ever addressed the elite-dominated responses to Nat Turner's revolt. The debate that implicitly questioned the temperate response when it took place occurred in county's churches. Southampton's church history had roots extending to the tumultuous time of the English Civil War. During the 17th century, George Fox preached a radical new version of Christianity in the Society of Friends, who were the many enemies ridiculed as Quakers, were soon a target of persecution. Many Quakers left England, famously for Pennsylvania, as well as other English colonies. Southampton County became a focus, with its first meeting established even before George Fox's death in 1691. In the 18th century, tension developed as Virginia grew even more dependent upon slavery, and the Quakers grew increasingly uncomfortable with slavery. By 1776, Southampton's Black Creek Free Friends meeting had renounced slaveholding. Revolutionary ideology contributed to the passage of Virginia's first manumission law, and some of Southampton's Quakers were among the first to free their slaves. Interesting. For example, in 1782, the same year that Virginia passed its first law allowing manumissions, Thomas Pretlow Sr., a father of one of Nat Turner's judges, freed 18 slaves. Quakers were not the only ones in Southampton to object to slavery. In 1774, a 19-year-old David Barrow began preaching at Southampton's newly established Black Creek Baptist Church. Although he owned 2 slaves in 1782, he came to the conclusion that slaveholding was contrary to the laws of God and nature. In 1784, he freed his slaves and encouraged his brethren to do the same. In 1786, the Black Creek Baptist Church, influenced by the example of its anti-slavery minister, declared slavery unrighteous. What one historian calls the clearest position any Virginia congregation would take in opposition to slavery in the Revolutionary era led at least 3 church members to free their slaves over the winter of 1787 and 1788. David Barrow's anti-slavery extended beyond Southampton. In 1790, Barrow was in attendance when the General Committee of the Baptist Associations passed a resolution that called slavery a violent deprivation of the rights of nature and urged for Baptists to use every legal measure to extirpate the hard evil from the land. Now, let me land for just a moment, folks. Last chapter is pretty predictable. Now, we know where this comes from. It comes from a Christian college. If we remember the person who's submitting this as his dissertation and a doctorate in ethics. And so they're, of course, going to land on all the things that make them grand. And I can imagine how this all ends, and I'm not going to read through it because, well, it's 7:52 and I got to get to it. So there we go. Nat Turner's Revolt. Not just from beginning to end, but we took the beginning and we took the end and we kind of squished them together. Either way, I'm glad we were able to connect the dots. As you can see, the end of all be all is clearing of their conscience and magnifying them on a pedestal. I did not know it would end in that manner, but of course we can see it's going to kind of go on and on about all that's been done to correct the wrongs, and there's nothing been done. There's nothing that's been done. The general wealth has been passed on from father to son. And you can give me all the apologies and the goodwill and the air dues you want. You know, I'm looking at your wealth and all that you accumulated, how you flaunt. Boom. All right, there we go. 7:53, that's the end of the show. Yeah. I'm happy. I'm happy with that one. All right, folks, it's Friday. You know, it's the last day of the week. But I got to tell you something. I see what's going on. We're going to talk about it on Sunday. The show Sunday is at noon, my time, whatever that time is for you. We do a show 6 days here, 6 days a week, and it is Sunday through Friday. On Saturday, I don't speak, you know. So there we go. We're going to talk about what we're looking at. And I got to tell you, man, America's finished. That's probably going to be the anchor topic on Sunday. So you probably want to tune in just to get that one. All right, folks, I got to go. It's Friday. Get to work. It's almost 8 o'clock. You're going to be late. Get dressed. Stop looking at me. All right, drive safe. Be safe, you know. And I know, thank you for looking at the Doug Rice Show. Please show your support, you know. Click the like button, notification bell for all it's worth. What the hell? But I know that today is the last day of the month of September, and hey, here comes October, right? Here comes Halloween. Here comes Columbus Day. You know what I mean? You can end this month on a sobering note. You can listen to what I've said, or you can read what I've wrote. But if you're going to go out there in public spaces, do me a favor, would you? Get that goddamn grin off your faces. Have a good weekend.